Climate change continues to be a hot topic among officials as Canada prepares to launch its first ever national strategy to adapt to climate change. On Monday, the federal government launched a public engagement process to hear input from Canadians regarding how to prepare for climate-related disasters. Well, this comes as flash flooding from heavy rain last week, combined with melting snow, has overtopped roads and damaged bridges and culverts in western Manitoba. And flooding isn't the only concern. The federal government says it's preparing for what could be a challenging summer of wildfires in parts of the country, especially in BC. Well, joining us now to give us a deeper look at how climate change has impacted Canada is Mr. Julius Lindsay, the Director of Sustainable Communities at the David Suzuki Foundation. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we mentioned some of the climate-related weather disasters that are impacting Manitoba and BC, but what other provinces have been impacted by climate change so far?
I think it's clear to say at this point that all provinces are being affected by climate change, and some of the extreme weather that we're seeing in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and BC right now, we saw in Ontario, where I'm located, over the past few years, and there was also a very large flood in Alberta a number of years back, and so we see this pattern of these extreme weather events happening across the country.
And how have the federal and provincial governments responded to such disasters? I guess the bigger question here would be whether such responses were enough.
Well, I think the federal and provincial governments have responded by providing aid and providing funds, but really it's municipalities and the local communities that are the most affected and who have to shoulder some of the cost of the cleanup and the impacts from infrastructure. Municipalities in Canada own 60 to 70% of infrastructure, are responsible for it. So a lot of these impacts and effects are being paid for from municipalities fixing and addressing these challenges.
And throughout the years, as you mentioned, we've seen wildfires, floods, heat domes, a lot of things happening across the country. But what would you say is the biggest environmental threat to Canada so far?
Well, I think climate change in general is the biggest environmental threat to Canada, and as we've seen, these impacts continue to happen. The costs and the damages continue to grow over the years, and it's something that we really, as a country, have to address and contemplate how we are going to address these effects and try and adapt to some of these changes and some of these disasters that we've already seen and the ones that we will see in the future.
All right, Mr. Lindsay, what are you hoping will be covered in the federal climate change adaptation plan?
Well, I'm really hoping that there's going to be a very robust piece around data. We need to understand where these risks are, how they will happen, how likely they are to happen. And that's really starts with the data that we have that underpins how we look at climate change. The second, as I said earlier, is climate change adaptation and impacts are really very locally focused. And so ways to connect with those local communities, ways to support those local communities in addressing climate change and adaptation in specifically, especially from our infrastructure perspective, is really something that I'm hoping to see in the plan. And I think the last piece that I'm really hoping to see in the plan is cross-country coordination. These impacts are very local and they happen differently in different places, but we need to be coordinated and ambitious in the way that we address climate change adaptation.
So what does an adaptation strategy mean for the overall fight to prevent further impacts from climate change?
Well, it really means it's about preparedness. There's a statistic that says that for every dollar we spend in preparation, we save $3 in terms of how much the impacts that we see. And so it's really about preparedness. It's really about understanding, as I said before, what those impacts are, where they might be, and then how we might address them. And that comes down to sort of very local level. It comes down to the various impacts that we might see, from flooding to heat to ice storms, and really understanding how that might affect the areas that we're in, and then building those strategies for how we can adapt to those changes that we're going to see in the future.
All right, Mr. Lindsay from the David Suzuki Foundation, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.